Some people take the straight path in life. But at Arizona State University, we respect your twists and turns. They make our online students more driven to excel in their professional lives. That's why our personalized suite of services empowers you with innovative resources and staff that sticks with you. Make your next turn with one of our 300-plus programs at ASU, a top 10 university for online bachelor's programs. Tap to learn more or visit us at asuonline.asu.edu.
There's so many things that need to get done. There's so many things to think about. And, when you're working and a loved one dies, you take some time off. But, at least in my kind of job, you don't take a month off. You take a finite, like maybe a week off to make arrangements. So there was just a lot of pressure during that time period. And people would say, what can I do for you? After I would say, well, we didn't tell people this, but mom was actually diagnosed with Alzheimer's, a few months ago. And I would always say, I'm fine, I've got it. Because I think that's the nature of a caregiver, don't you? Or a lot of us.
Welcome, Mary Moreland, author of The Gap Between. She became a member of the sandwich generation when her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Juggling caring for her mom, 2 young sons, and her career taught Mary the true challenges of this delicate balancing act. Join us for a touching episode as Mary shares her journey as her mom's primary caretaker through every stage of Alzheimer's, while still embracing life's joys. Don't miss out on the wisdom of this incredible guest expert. Welcome to Fading Memories, the podcast for caregivers of loved ones with dementia. I'm your host, Jennifer Fink. Join me as we navigate the challenges of dementia caregiving together. Through personal stories, expert interviews, and practical advice, we'll explore effective communication strategies, stress management techniques, and ways to cope with the emotional journey. This podcast is your beacon of support and empowerment. Let's share our experiences, find solace, and discover the strength within us. Get ready to embark on a transformative caregiving journey with Fading Memories. If you're looking for additional advice, be sure to sign up for our weekly email newsletter. It's brief, gives you great advice, you can read it in less than 5 minutes, and you know where to find the link. It's in the website, on the show notes. We're working on subscriber-only information and specials, so you're not going to want to miss out. Unfortunately, it's part of our modern world that some people will look to prey on the most vulnerable members of our society. With modern technology, scammers have more avenues to exploit people than ever before. Americans over the age of 65, especially those living with Alzheimer's and dementia, are receiving an average of almost 200 unwanted landline calls every week. That's more than 28 calls a day from bad actors trying to defraud our loved ones. Even worse, nearly 10% of these calls have no caller ID, making it even harder to distinguish between legitimate and fraudulent calls. Older adults are less likely to be tech-savvy and more likely to be home during the day to answer these calls. Please don't rely on notes by the phone as an attempt to stop a crime before it happens. You need IMP. IMP offers advanced call protection and a variety of other features to keep you and your loved ones safe from scams. IMP only allows wanted callers to ring through. Stopped are 100% of the spam, scam, political, fundraising, debt collection, and survey calls before a single ring. Traditional call blockers can't do this, and neither can the Do Not Call registry. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect yourself and your loved ones by going to www.joinimp.com. Also, the link is in the show notes. Now, on with our show. My apologies for the lack of ideal audio quality. Sometimes technology is not our friend. Thanks for joining me, everyone. You know how much I appreciate your time. With me today is Mary Moreland. She is the author of The Gap Between. It is a conversation about loving and caring and supporting people with Alzheimer's, but she especially addresses the sandwich generation because that's where she lived. And Mary is an attorney by trade, so she had a tough
tough mountain to climb with caring for children and her mom and being a lawyer and writing a book. So thanks for joining me, Mary.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what encouraged you to write the book?
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I'm an attorney by trade, and I have been for about 25 years, although currently I'm in a business role. I'm a mother of two who, when I overtook her caregiving responsibilities, were 6 and 8, but now they're a lot older. They're like, 19 and 17. And I'm also a single parent, which I have been for quite some time. And the reason why I wrote the book really was because when I was going through the journey with my mother, I kind of bumbled around a lot, and it was hard to sort of find resources that I needed. And a lot of times after the fact, I thought, oh man, if I had thought about that beforehand, I would have planned for it. So my intent in writing the book was really just to transfer that knowledge to other people to hopefully help them. And, I hope that it is helpful and that it saves people some time. And I tried to write it in a conversational tone, kind of an informal tone. I want people to pick it up and feel like I have a friend here. Like Mary's been through this, and the book is organized by a memoir section, which explains the real life experience with my mother and how we overcame certain challenges, like taking away the car keys or, finding different types of care and things like that. And it's divided by topic: legal documentation, of course, end of life care, finding care, talking to children about Alzheimer's, really topics that I thought would be helpful for others. Then there's a research tip section, kind of summarizing resources about that chapter from different sources. And in between chapters, I've included my mother's poems. There's one of her poems in between chapters. She was a very talented poet. And I did that because I thought the juxtaposition of this really thoughtful poetry next to the memoir section about her, losing her cognitive abilities, I thought that was really powerful, because you have a window not just into what she was like during her dementia, but into what her mind was like before she became ill. So there's a little bit about the book.
Well, I agree. So the book is really easy to read, and it's definitely, some of them are a little bit too how-to, kind of like, here's how to find resources and how to deal with this. So I very much enjoyed the juxtaposition between the memoir and the, hey, here's what I learned and I'm sharing it with you, because that is kind of what I try to do with this show. I was in a similar position to you, although my daughter was 25 at the time when my dad died, and I assumed responsibility for my mom. It was like, holy crud, there's a lot of stuff I don't know.
Yeah.
And this was in 2017, which it was a lot harder to find resources then. And you're going back like what, to about 2012, 2013?
Yeah,
when you took over?
2012. And I think you're absolutely right. There are a lot more resources now. During that time, it was really a challenge to find resources, and I had no idea where to look, to be honest. I mean, I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, and that was very helpful, but I don't think I really used the website in a helpful way. I was very focused on what stage of the disease is my mother in, like what's going to happen here? Whereas I think, well, especially now, the Alzheimer's Association has so many different things that can help you. But then I think there were things that I didn't take advantage of because I didn't really know what to ask. And I thought I knew what caregiving was going to be like because my father was mom's caregiver till he passed away. And we had discussed kind of in general strokes of here's what it should look like. Here's what we feel like is important to us as a family. But that kind of very general overview, I don't think really prepares you for just all the things that you have to be thinking of when you're caring for someone with dementia.
And I think you need to be part attorney, part doctor, part, activities director, you know, I'm missing a whole bunch of things, but everybody listening knows what I'm talking about. And society just sort of expects, it's like, it's your parent, it's your spouse, maybe it's a grandmother or an aunt, but it's like, of course you are going to take care of them, and then they don't help. One of the best things that people can access through the Alzheimer's Association is their savvy caregiver training. And I unfortunately didn't know about it until 2019. I took that in the spring of 2019. My mom passed away March 31st, 2020. So by the time I took it, it was like, well, this information would have been really useful to know 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It still helped because by the time I took it, I was doing the show. And so it gave me a lot more insights. But, even at that time, people were still hesitant to share their experiences with loved ones on social media. And that all changed a lot between 2019 and now. And the thing that I try to tell people is, what you're getting from other people's journeys on social media is great. But I talk to people who don't spend their life on social media. And, a lot of them, I don't see most of my guests on social media. So this is, to me, is like a really nice balance. So one of your biggest challenges after you assumed responsibility for your mom was having to explain why she acted strangely after the death of your dad. And that was obviously an additional challenge. Did you feel unable to grieve fully your dad's passing because you immediately had this very large responsibility? I know I did. I had about 48 hours, and then it was everybody else's needs.
Yes, no, that's so true. And, just going back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, we as a family made a conscious decision not to tell anyone about my mother's dementia. And we were very protective of her because we were concerned about that stigma, and I think that we're chipping away at that stigma, but I think it still exists. And it's also a reason why people don't want to tell their doctors that they're having, memory issues, whereas that would be really helpful, to know. So after my father passed away, and we had been kind of protecting, my mother, people came over to our house and they wanted to talk to her and express their condolences. And I later realized when I did kind of a medical inventory, I got the list of all her prescriptions from her doctor and then compared it to what she was taking. And it was all messed up. She didn't have any of the right medications. So she was extra loopy. And so people would sit and, ask like really easy questions, like, I'm sorry for your loss, or, just kind of basic statements that one would expect. And she had not really comprehended that her husband of 50 years had passed away because, she was off of her regular schedule. She was probably very tired because after he passed away, I didn't know where, it's like, well, she can't really spend the night in the house by herself. So I took her home with me, which I'm sure was very disorienting. And so since we hadn't told anyone, these family friends who hadn't seen her for a while were very alarmed. And I got a lot of phone calls after the fact of, Mary, I think maybe you need to make an appointment for your for your mother at the doctor. Mary, I think something might be going on with your mother, And so it was like an additional, now I'm telling people about mom's Alzheimer's, in addition to trying to grieve my father. So like you said, it was just a lot at once. And like you, I felt like I'm just kind of on adrenaline. There's so many things that need to get done. There's so many things to think about. And, when you're working and a loved one dies, you take some time off, but, at least in my kind of job, you don't take a month off, you take a finite, like maybe a week off to make arrangements. So there was just a lot of pressure during that time period. And people would say, what can I do for you? After I would say, well, we didn't tell people this, but mom was actually diagnosed with Alzheimer's, a few months ago. And I would always say, I'm fine, I've got it. Because I think that's the nature of a caregiver, don't you? Or a lot of us.
When we don't know what we need,
yes,
we don't want to be a burden to our friends and family and neighbors. So, we just, and in the beginning, and this is not necessarily maybe for you and I, because we had to take over with my mom, she was in the later stages. But it's like, in the beginning, it's not that hard. You make adjustments, mentally, it's more challenging than I think it is physically. And so you do got it. And then the next thing you know, life moves on. The kids need things. Mom needs things. A job, and you're like drowning. And now it's like, can somebody throw me a rope? And people are like, rope? What rope? We don't know. What do you mean rope? It's like, huh? What do you mean? I don't know if I have a rope. And it's just like, what I always tell people to do in an early way, when they get a diagnosis like your mom did, is to make a list of all the tasks you have to do today. And then all the tasks you have to do this week, all the tasks that need to be done monthly, and then just keep adding all the responsibilities that it requires to run your household, manage the children, manage the person you're caring for, managing yourself, maintaining your job. And just writing all that down is exhausting. And then make a list of everybody you know. They do not have to be local. And then this is the key point, write down what you think they are best suited to. Like, apparently you would probably be the person I'd write down, like, she can review contracts or any kind of legal stuff. I read that and it's like, huh? Because I am an entrepreneur and an artist. And please do not ask me to call people any place that is going to put me on hold. It gives me freaking anxiety and drives me straight up the wall. My husband was a banker for 20 years. He's a real estate broker. He worked during the 2008 housing crash when being on hold was like life for him and the only way to get business done. And he can be on hold for 2 hours, doesn't tweak him at all. But man, it makes me crazy. You need some cookies, some meals, a drive someplace, walk the dogs. I'm your girl. So now you've got a list of things that need to be done, people who might be able to help you do them. So when Mary comes by and says, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry about your dad. And, now I'm learning about your mom. Is there anything I can do to help? You have an answer instead of, oh no, it's fine. I got it, because you don't got it.
Yeah. And can I add something to your list? Because
Definitely.
You and I think are a lot alike. Because the first thing, when I had a moment to myself, finally, that's the first thing I did. I didn't think of assigning names to the tasks. So that would have been good. But I do this in pretty much every area of my life. A do, delegate, delay, or dump, because a lot of things on your list you don't have to do right now, or maybe they're not really that important. And the other thing you said that really resonated with me is think about things that people are good at. Because for a long, long time, I took care of my mom for about 8 years. I was frustrated because out-of-town relatives weren't doing this, or out-of-town relatives weren't doing that, or my sibling isn't, I would expect him to be doing XYZ and he wasn't. But then finally it clicked. You have to meet those people where they are. And just like you said, what are they good at? So for my out-of-town relative, it became apparent who's very good at research. So I could say, look, we're going to have to move mom, I think. So could you go ahead and research some places where maybe she could go? For another relative, he didn't like, I would think, why aren't you coming over to visit? Just come over to visit, spend time. But that just wasn't really his jam, I guess people say now. But he loved going to church every Sunday. And he really enjoyed picking her up on the way to church and going out to lunch. And it was just, once we kind of found something that sort of fit with his schedule, it kind of all started making more sense and it was more helpful. But I love your idea. And I'm going to add to my do, delegate, delay, or dump list, like the name of someone who can do certain things.
And that's the delegate side. It helps too, because, all of us are busy. All of us have, 15 things. I've got multiple projects going on right now, and it's like juggle, juggle, juggle. That's just normal life. And if you ask somebody to do something that, yeah, they could do it. Yeah, I could call the insurance companies, the doctor. I really don't want to. I didn't want to do it for my mom. I don't want to do it for myself. But if you really needed me to, I could probably do it. But God, I really wouldn't want to. So now I feel kind of roped in. It's like, it's not a positive feeling. So if you, if you find something that, like, you said the relative, picked mom up to take her to church and took her out to lunch. I mean, that's like a good chunk of the day, at least half of a day.
It's a great chunk of a day. Yeah.
And that gives you time, like you're not dealing with somebody that's visiting within your home. You've got Sunday to do whatever the heck you need or want, hopefully just relaxing and, taking care of yourself was what you did. But that's actually better for everybody, because mom was getting out, she's getting socialization, she's getting different stimulation, and it was easy for him, and he didn't feel like he was getting sucked in. And that's, I think, what I don't think it's conscious so much, is like, well, I want to help, but I don't, it's like, you don't want the drowning person to drown you too, is kind of the.
Right. Because everyone has so many commitments these days. And, in doing research for my book, I asked people, how did you get a break? Like, what are some things that you did? Because for me, my mother is probably one of the incredibly rare people who had a long-term care insurance policy. And she bought it right when they started coming out. And so it had all these benefits that there's no way you could get those benefits now. So we were really fortunate that we had that. But I know a lot of people, almost everyone doesn't have that resource. And they're surprised to find out that, Medicare doesn't pay for a lot. I mean, pays for a little, and the things that it pays for in terms of care it's very specific. So one thing, I found a mobile dentist. I live in a large city, so, maybe you don't have those in a smaller town, but that was very helpful because the dentist was used to treating people with dementia. And so that was helpful. A friend of mine said she found a bath lady who was covered by her insurance.
Oh, that's cool.
And who came to the house like once a week or so. But she said that was a really nice break for her. And then physical therapy. My mother went through physical therapy a number of times, and that was covered by her Medicare, which I know everybody's insurance is, different because you have different add-ons to your Medicare. But that was another idea. And then there are all different types of, adult daycares now, or things at churches for people with dementia. Now, having said that, I tried all those things with my mother at first because I was very worried about the social stimulation aspect, and she hated all of them. I mean, she was like, we visited the daycare place, and I called them beforehand and said, could mom teach a writing class? Because there were all these people there who were working, but they really weren't working.
Right.
That was just kind of their purpose. And they said, sure, she could come and read some of her poetry, or she could talk about writing, or we could have a writing class. That might be a good thing to have anyway. People could journal, And she told me writing was an independent activity. And then during our meeting, she said, writing is an independent activity. And then on the way out to the car, she said, Mare, I do not belong there. And I was thinking,
all say that.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, I'm really sorry, but you'd probably really enjoy it. And then she went to one mixer where the organizer thought it would be fun to wear funny hats.
No.
And that was just not her,
Yeah, that's not me either.
Right. So that was just it for that. No more.
Like, I'd love to make the funny hat, but then I feel weird wearing it, which is silly. And my mom was really, so when my dad ended up in the hospital for 32 days, and in that time, my mother was at my house, she was at my sister's house. My sister had school-age children, and her in-laws lived there. So that was a huge, just one more thing too many. And then my aunt, my mom's youngest sister, well, the youngest sibling, would go to my parents' house and be with my mom. And it did not take very long to realize mom did not respect me as, in charge of the household that would also be in charge of her. And I was like, there is no way in hell this woman can come live with me. Because one or both of us will be dead by the end of the week. Now, thankfully, we had resources. My parents' house was paid for. We rented that out. So I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now I live in the Sierra foothills. The rent covered almost all of the memory care plus her Social Security. And then the financial planner deposited money from their investment accounts into the trust account. And she had plenty of money, which was my biggest fear, because when you observe what's going on in memory care, a lot of people run out of money at the time their loved one needs just like the most care. And so that's scary.
Yeah, or people budget, for that big monthly fee that covers their food and their room and board, but then there are a lot of additional expenses, just, underwear and personal supplies. And, I can't tell you for a while how many times on a Sunday night I was grabbing my kids and like going to the grocery store because we had run out of this or we had run out of that. And then I tried a lot of different things. I tried Amazon subscriptions, for example, because I'm like, okay, maybe that'll save me some time. They'll just come automatically. I know what she needs. But at this point, she was in assisted living, and I don't know where those supplies went. I would
they grow legs,
go, right? And look for them. And then I ended up finding, and this is such a genius idea, I thought, for a business. This lady in town, and her small business was she went to care facilities and she did inventory for you. And she had different packages that you could purchase. And that was very reasonable. She wasn't charging a huge amount of money. But I actually think I spent less money then because, we knew exactly what she needed. We knew exactly how much more, she had. So that was helpful. And I wanted to ask you, did you ever talk to a social worker? Because now, after the fact, I've learned how valuable social workers are.
No, and I probably should have one on the show, because I'm not sure I've even, out of like up to 300 episodes nearly, I don't think I've ever had one on the show. So that's mental note to check into that. It would have been nice when my mom was very good at avoiding a diagnosis. My listeners know this, but for your knowledge, my grandmother had vascular dementia, and my maternal great-grandmother also had what they called senile dementia back in the day. She died before I was born, so nobody knows what flavor of dementia she had. So my mom knew what was coming. And we had a conversation one day when we had a business together, and she didn't recognize her handwriting on an order she had taken that had no directions or due dates or anything useful. Like, am I supposed to do with this? And I asked her, like, what am I supposed to do with this order for Mary? And she's like, oh, I don't know. That's so-and-so's handwriting. I mean, my heart literally just went splat on the floor, because her handwriting and the employee's handwriting were not even remotely similar. And I thought, oh boy, this is bad. And I told her, I'm getting a little more concerned. You used to have a couple daffy moments a week. She was like, so this was like 2003. So she was like 56, she was 60. And I said, now you're starting to have them like daily. And she goes, well, I don't want to end up like my mother. And turned around and stomped off. And I was like, well, that's helpful as hell, because, murder is illegal. So I don't really know how you expect me to solve for that problem. But we never had any conversations as a family as to like where she was at, she she did all the testing to donate a kidney to my dad in 2008 and was rejected for cognitive impairment. And I thought, finally, we got a diagnosis. And it wasn't until after my dad passed away that I realized she wasn't diagnosed until the end of 2011. I was like, good Lord, a blind person would have known she had dementia at that point. Like, what's the point? And they lost like all her scans. And so I had to start all over. It would have been really nice if somebody had basically said, we know you've been part of this process, but now you're taking over. So here's what we think you should do. No, I had to figure out everything by myself. It was really not fun.
Me too. And now I know there's some elder care consultants, who will help you make a game plan. And if your loved one's in the hospital, they always have social workers who are free, I think.
Yeah.
But, it's so interesting when you talk about how you first noticed your mom having, dementia or memory slips, because for us, the people who saw her, every couple of times every week, we were completely in denial. And it was the out of town visitors who came, maybe twice a year, who noticed these great declines. And she was always so good at, deflecting, like she lost, she misplaced this very special gift. Well, there's so many gifts. Christmas is such a, stressful time. Or, Mom, you went out to run that errand. You spent way much longer than I thought you would have, which now I'm thinking she probably was lost, well, I just took some time for myself. I had some other errands I needed to run, and it wasn't until, what did you just say? A crazy person would have noticed she had dementia.
Yeah, a blind person could have seen that she had dementia.
Right. I mean, I almost felt like it wasn't until one family dinner where, cooking is so hard, and the timing of it, the math of it, where it was just clear, like she just couldn't do any of it. And she always loved preparing big meals. But anyway, it's interesting how people with dementia can so easily explain things. And maybe because I was in denial and so wanted not to think there was a problem, that I just accepted it.
Well, so my mom was in her early 50s, back to the business. She would start. So this was back in the film days when real estate appraisers actually had to take photographs with a camera and take them to the 1 hour photo place and have them printed.
I used to work in the 1 hour photo place. That was my first job when I was 15. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it was like a photo mat?
It was Fox Photo.
Oh, Fox Photo. I remember those guys too. We had a photography studio and a 1 hour photo lab. So we did everything. We did enlargements, and we eventually got into digital in the year 2000, which seems like so long ago. Which there was this one, I don't know if she chatted too much with this one gal, but we had an appraiser, really nice gal. To fit the photos they needed on their forms, they had to have the 3.5 by 5. And this was the era of, bigger was better. So everybody was getting 4 by 6s. And to print the 3.5 by 5, you literally had to change the paper canister in the machine. Not complicated, not a big deal, but if 98% of your clients are getting 4 by 6, you have to literally make a mental note, at X time, I have to stop and run so-and-so's, pictures for their appraisal. And she usually gave us 24 hours. It wasn't, it was pretty reasonable. This poor gal would walk in and be like, oh crap, we didn't do it. And it happened. So it happened often enough, because I think this gal would go out. I think she'd get the job on Monday and do the pictures on Tuesday. She'd stop by and drop it off in the afternoon. My mom was off on Wednesdays, and then she would come Wednesday afternoon to pick them up. And it just got to the point where she literally opened the door. That's it, done. It was so, and it's and there was one other time. So I did a portrait of a really good client. They'd been around a long time. She called. She was also a real estate agent, and she called and dropped more F-bombs than I've heard in a long time. And I thought, whoa, I didn't realize she spoke like this. And she'd been dealing with my mom, which apparently was just too challenging. And so I ended up basically being a helicopter employee, you know, because if I heard my mom shooting the breeze with somebody, I'd go out there and go like, oh, so, you know, what are we doing for so-and-so today? And I would try to figure out what they'd been talking about so that I didn't have to later call and clarify, with air quotes on the clarify for people who aren't watching YouTube. It was stressful. And then when my dad decided somewhat abruptly, our lease was up at the end of 2005, early 2005, he's like, oh, the landlord broke the lease, we're out of here. He was not a positive guy. And I was relieved because I thought I knew, you know, I'd been building up my own business in my hometown for about 18 months. So I wasn't, you know, too stressed out about like being unemployed, but I was worried because I'm like, you know, my mom's got purpose and meaning here, even though a lot of the stuff she does drives me straight up the wall. She'd sweep the walk. We had trees that just dropped leaves. I swear it dropped leaves all year round. And the leaves would then blow in the door. Well, you know, you prefer not to have the entrance of your studio and your business messy. And she's literally like 5 minutes to opening. She's out there sweeping. I'm like, could we like maybe work on the orders? Could we do something practical, please? Oh, it used to drive me straight up the wall. I'd have to go in the back and do my own stuff and ignore her.
Now, did your
mom,
in addition to forgetfulness, did she go through any stages of like agitation or getting angry or getting paranoid, or was she pretty
she didn't have
happy?
Paranoia that I'm aware of. No, she was not one of those people that got the happy Alzheimer's. It just seemed to Alzheimer's seemed to amplify her personality, which, you know, she had very high expectations of me. And the only way you knew that she approved of what you were doing is if you overheard her telling somebody else she was proud of you. It was neglected to always tell me, which was super frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really hard, you know, when you're taking care of somebody that's got such a life-limiting disease, you know, and it's your parent, you're like, all you want to hear is like, you're doing a really good job. And like almost nobody ever said that. And she got more challenging as time went on. But I know your mom had paranoia. How did you guys handle that? Because that's not something, like I said, I've experienced.
Now we're going to take a quick break for an ad. These ads help me continue to bring the show to you for free. When I learned that despite eating as healthy as possible, we can still have undernourished brains, I was frustrated. I also live in a farming community, so I'm aware that our food isn't grown as well as we need. Learning about neuroreserves, Relevate, and how it's formulated to fix this problem convinced me to give them a try. Now I know many of you are skeptical, as was I. However, I know it's working because of one simple change. My sweet tooth is gone. I didn't expect that, and it's not something other users have commented on, but here's some truth. My brain always wanted something sweet. Now, fruit usually did the trick, but not always. One bad night's sleep would fire up my sugar cravings so much they were almost impossible to ignore. You ever have your brain screaming for a donut? Well, for me, those days are gone. It's been about 6 months since I started taking the supplement, and I have no regrets. I believe in my results so much that I'm passing on my 15% discount to you. Try it for 2 or 3 months and see if you have a miraculous sweet tooth cure, or maybe just better focus and clarity. It's definitely worth a try. Now back to our conversation.
Yeah, fortunately, she didn't have too much paranoia, but there were kind of 2 periods of time when she really did. One was there were some boxes in the garage, and she made up her mind that it was me kicking her out. And those were some things. And I was kicking her out of her house, and she was homeless. And she actually called people and told them, you know, Mary's kicking me out. I'm going to be homeless on the streets of Houston. And then the other time was after my father died. She started inventing all these things in her mind about what happened to him, you know, and they had been married for 50 years and how he had run off with someone else. And thinking about it now, I see that I think what she was trying to do is just make sense of these facts by kind of filling in the blanks herself. And with the boxes, someone had this great idea, just label all the boxes Jane's belongings. And then that she was very happy with that. Then she would go to the garage and she would open it and she would see boxes. And I see all these boxes. Well, they're yours, Mom. Look, they say Jane's belongings. And she was labeling everything anyway, with kind of Post-its like a lot of people do. And so that, evil plan forgotten, like I was no longer this like horrible child. And then with my dad, I spent a lot of time trying to explain to her what happened. And it was just amazing to me that she didn't remember going to the funeral, at all. Or the plans for the funeral or anything really about the night that he passed away. And so for a while I was trying to explain what happened, and she could not comprehend it. It would hurt her feelings. When she was lucid enough to kind of understand what was going on, it really hurt her feelings. And so finally I just said, he loves you very much. He's in a safe place and he loves you. And then she was happy with that because, I think that's all she wanted to know was that he was okay. And I was talking to someone this morning, actually, who said her dad would wake up and ask where the water buffalo were. And apparently he grew up on a farm and they had water buffalo. He's 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
Not in the US, somewhere else. And so for a while, this person was telling me, I was trying to explain to him how there are no water buffalo here. Like we're in Houston and you're in my house and, you're thinking about the past when you were a little kid. And then finally she just said, the water buffalo had been put up, because I guess he was worried that they had been left out and they would walk away or something. Anyway. But yeah, fortunately, those were the only 2 times of paranoia. And she did go through a stage where she got really aggressive, which was very unusual for my mother. Because like you said, the Alzheimer's kind of amplified your mother's personality. Well, I feel that way too, except for the few bits of paranoia and the bit of time when she was being physically aggressive. And then her doctor put her on some medication, which I know is controversial, but for her, it helped her. It calmed her down and she was kind of back to her baseline self.
We learned my aunt learned the hard way. And I learned, thankfully, we don't generally learn from other people's experiences like we should, but I learned from her. So my grandfather passed away and my grandmother went through the same thing. She was telling my aunt, your father left me for another woman. And my aunt would be like, no, he died. And then my grandmother would start the whole grieving process.
Right. Over. That's exactly it.
And when you're confronted with, no, he didn't leave you for another woman. He died, is like, that's just a no-win situation, really. I don't really know. I mean, I'm not really sure what she could have said. Obviously, telling her he died was bad. But my experience with my mom, because she was so advanced, she remembered like the first day after he died late on a Thursday night, Friday, she'd already had a hair appointment. And my sister insisted on taking her shopping for new clothes, which she really did need. She was wearing things that was 20 years old, which wasn't really the issue, except they were like 2 and 3 sizes too big. So it was, that was what made my sister feel good. We knew she was moving to memory care. There was absolutely zero reason to argue with that. Plus it gave us something to do. But when she was in memory care, I always took her out to get her nails done or go watch children. That's the one activity I could get her to do with me, is go to the park and watch children. They're like stalkers.
That's a good idea, though.
It worked. It was challenging because she would only walk behind me. I could not get her to walk elbow to elbow. If I slowed down, she would slow down. And, people have heard this story a lot, but I was convinced that woman was going to face plant on the sidewalk. And I was going to be the evil person because I didn't let this old lady catch up. And it was always a challenge. And I had a guest, geez, I'm not sure what year it was in. I think it must have been in early 23, maybe late 22. She heard that my mom was the oldest of four, and she's like, "Your mom was keeping an eye on the kids." And I'm like, "Well, dang, I really wish I'd
Oh,
known that when
yeah.
she was alive.
You know,
Might have done me some
isn't,
good."
yes, isn't it amazing in retrospect? You see things from a different angle that you just kind of wish, like at that moment, oh, I didn't even, it didn't even occur to me she was taking care of the kids at all.
Yeah, I mean, it just, and she watched her feet, so just like getting from point A to point B was always stressful. But then when we got to the bench to watch children or whatever, we'd go to the pool and we went all over the place to watch kids. But we would be leaving memory care in this one particular day. So her room was on the opposite side of the building from the exit. She said, does my husband know where I'm at? And it was always that snarky tone of voice, which just grates on your nerves pretty quickly. And I would say, yes, mom, dad knows where we're going. We get 20 feet. Does my husband know where we're going? Yes, mom. I told dad we were going to go to the park, and he thought that was a great idea. 5 times between her room and my car, I was like, I'm going to stuff this woman in the trunk, or I'm leaving her here. I can't deal with this question. And all of a sudden, it was like somebody ran by and slapped me upside the head. I was like, I just figured out why she keeps asking me this stupid question over and over. So when she asked it again, my husband know where I'm at? Yes. Chuck told me to take you out to the park to watch the kids because he thought that'd be fun. Did not ask me again the rest of the day. It's like, oh my God. So once I realized she did not realize that she was my mother, she did not realize that who dad, when I said dad, it didn't relate to her being her husband. It was just like, once I made those connections, I was like, okay. But it was really hard because she'd always go, does my husband know where I'm at? Yeah, or where is my husband? Oh, I saw him at the Rotary meeting, and he said he was going to do some errands and he'd be back later. I always had to come up with stories. And the first 6 months, that was hard because it was like, kind of be really nice to be able to reminisce about my father with my mother. But nope, we only got that once. In typical family, I think a lot of this happens. Families always have important conversations in the car. You're sitting at a red light,
because
and
no
she
one
goes,
can leave.
yeah, for real. You're strapped in. We were at a red light. We weren't even that far from the residence. And she looks at me and she goes, it was really sad when your dad died. Thank God we were not moving. And so I was like, I mean, she could have just slapped me and I would have been less like stunned. And I was like, yeah, he'd been sick a long time. My dad had diabetes. So I think, he's doing better now. I'm like scrambling because it's like, like, oh my God, she's acknowledging that my dad is gone, which means she knows who I am and, all those connections. And it was literally like 90 seconds. And then she goes, oh, that tree is really pretty. And I'm like, well, so much for that.
Yeah, it's such a bizarre disease because I remember, just like you said, my mother would have these flashes of memory. And when she would have that kind of flash, like your mom saying it was so sad when your dad died, I just had in my mind that, well, that means her brain is still there, and I just felt like if I ask her enough questions, if I remind her of enough things, it's going to come back. Like I'm going to be able to have a moment with her where she knows who I am and I know who she is. But, and I kept doing that, which, thinking about my lawyer background, was probably not very pleasant, but she was always a good sport about it. And at the end, she always just agreed with me, I think, to shut me up. But, it's hard to accept how this disease works. How even when you have those flashes, you can be happy for that in the moment, but it's just a moment. And I think that's just such a confounding thing about this illness.
And that was the only time in 3 years that I got that. Other than right at the end, she had fallen and broken her leg. And this was literally at the start of the pandemic. So that was like real fun. And she's the caregiver, one of the caregivers in the residence said, she'd gotten mom laughing and everything. And so I whipped out my phone to record. She was talking to my mom. And my mom said, something about time flying, and knowing now that she was, looking back at that video, it's like, I think that was kind of like a premonition. She knew she was going. I don't watch it too often because it's tough, but I had that one moment about dad, and that was cool. But like I said, it did take me a little while to figure out, you know, that I couldn't answer as myself. I had to be the person she thought I was, and that was tricky.
And you mentioned your mom falling, and that happened to me. I remember I was at work and got a call.
Oof.
Your mother, you need to get here right away. She needs to go somewhere and get x-rays because we don't know. She could have broken her hip. And fortunately, I had already planned for where would I take mom if she fell? Where would we go? What's nearby? How would I get there? So that was really a good, time saver. But one thing I never thought about, which I could have, it just didn't occur to me, was how am I going to handle, as her disease progresses, transportation for her, because I always took her in my car, and then it got more difficult to take her in my car, but I could get her to maneuver in and put the seatbelt on. I'd put it on floor, even though she didn't know what that was. And then, all of a sudden when she couldn't get out of her wheelchair to get in the car, I remember we had a doctor's appointment and I hadn't planned for that at all. I hadn't really thought ahead to think, okay, how are we going to do that? Do we need a transportation company? How am I going to find that? Is that covered by insurance? So there were a few things that, I think it's very hard to do in the moment. But if you can take some time, or maybe on the list we talked about at the beginning of your podcast, you could assign to someone, think of, transportation solutions, where is she going to live? Just kind of what questions should we be asking the insurance to do that kind of pre-planning. And one thing we did do that was very helpful was I did ask her doctor, what's next? What are some things we should be thinking of as a family? What are decisions that you've seen come up that are hard for people? And so we had a lot of discussions about a stomach plug. I know that's not a very, cheery topic, but it was good that we had already kind of discussed that as a family so that when that came up, it wasn't, or, what hospital she might go to if she needed to go to the hospital. So when that came up during COVID and they called me and said, she needs an ambulance, she needs to go to the hospital. Fortunately, I already knew which one. But I like that. If I had to do it all over again, I would do the list, I would assign the people, and I would have so many good questions for them that I would have had no clue how to ask in 2012. 2012 to 2020. That's when she passed away. Yeah.
Well, we went through it for 20 years, but my dad did most of it. So I just had to figure out stuff for 3. But the whole, what should I plan for? What might be coming next is the key thing that I got out of your book. And now we're way into this show today. And I think that's what a lot of people don't do. And maybe if they do ask, they get mediocre answers, because obviously every human is different, every brain is different, the disease affects people differently. So answering that question is not necessarily, you might say, well, they might start falling and they might break a leg and be wheelchair bound, and then what are you going to do about transportation, or what do you do when they're bed bound? I mean, some of those conversations we don't really want to have, but it is good to know that these things might be coming up. So before we get too much further into the hour here, the one thing I really wanted to ask that I have not actually talked to any guest about that I can recall, and I do have a pretty good memory, is how did you manage your career and raising your sons and caring for your mother? And obviously you're still sane because you wrote a book. So is there some advice you can give for people who, like me, still needed to work, wanted to work? I mean, at least I wasn't raising my daughter. She moved out February 1st. My dad died March 2nd. And I was like, excuse me, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. And I have been planning on empty nest for a long time. So I'm going to enjoy it. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I'll say about kind of the sandwich generation, or even if you're just a working parent and you have a spouse, is I don't think there's anybody, even if they look like everything is seamless and going perfectly well, I think everybody's struggling, especially the sandwich generation. Even the people, because people would say to me, oh, Mary, you look like you're just handling all of this so well, and you're doing so well in your career and your kids are doing well in school. And, you've got your mom over here. And I would just, oh, thank you, thank you. But, really in the inside, I was like struggling a lot of the time, you know? So the first thing I would say is be easy on yourself, because all you can do is your best. And I think when you're a working person and you have small kids, I think some of those skills are a bit transferable. I mean, I hope that doesn't sound offensive, but you've kind of gotten used to the fact that, well, I can't go to every school event, so I need to kind of pick and choose and prioritize different things. And maybe you've already thought through, like I thought through, because I think employers are more understanding now, because we all know someone with dementia, or we know someone caring for someone with dementia. But back in 2012, it really wasn't, talked about so much. And you're in a job and you're expected to do, work, and so I think there's a tendency for some people to say, oh, of course, go do whatever it is you need to do, but get your work done.
Yeah.
I think that's just no matter where you work or who you are. So I would say, like I started telling you at the beginning, I had actually changed jobs right before my dad died from a place where I had been for a long time to this new place that I really, really liked. But since I didn't have those relationships with people, it was harder to say, like, I really need to take, this afternoon to go look for care, or, I need to leave right away because my mother just fell. It just didn't feel as good. So one thing I did was I went back to my job where I had kind of more relationships. And I think, honestly, that was the moment in my career. I had always had this trajectory that I wanted to follow, like my 5-year plan, because I'm just a planner. That's who I am. And I think that was the moment where I realized, you need to change the way you're thinking about things. Not that you can't be successful, but you need to be, for me, maybe other people are different, more in the moment, And it was more, I'm not going to put all this pressure on myself to achieve all these things. I'm just going to really focus on doing the best job that I can in the moment and formulating good relationships with people. And ironically, I think I probably did better than I would have if I had been so rigid, about following my plan. And one thing I did have was like a plan ABC for childcare, because, being a lawyer, I was fortunate enough to be able to afford someone who could come to our house. But what happens if, that person doesn't show up that day, or that person is sick, or that person has a family emergency? So, I had kind of backup plans, and I sort of had the same for my mother. Like, we had caregivers who came to the home, but then I also had a backup plan that I had like vetted an agency, so she didn't like the agency people at all. Because she didn't know them, and it wasn't an ideal situation, and she really was unhappy about it, but I knew she was safe, and sometimes I think you have to accept, I know my mother's, unhappy with me, but I also know that what I've done here is for her safety, but I think there are a lot of people in kind of that sandwich generation And I do find that it's helpful if you find somebody else going through the same thing, if you can say, look, could I put you on my list if I need somebody to pick up my kids from school, because maybe you need that while you're taking care of your mom, could you do that? And I'll do that for you, kind of ask around and try to form a network of different things, and talking to other people who are in a similar situation is helpful. Now, having said that, I think I probably talked to 2 people because I was just so busy and kind of, overwhelmed with everything to do. But I think my main comment for sandwich generation caregivers is just have reasonable expectations of yourself and know if you really are trying, in good faith, that's the best. You can't fault yourself if you're trying your best.
That is
And
true.
some things are going to slip. I mean, they are. And there were a lot of times when it was obvious, instead of the cane, mom needed a walker. And people would come and have lunch with her and say, like, well, Mary, why doesn't she have a walker? Like, she needs a walker. Like, she has a cane. And I would think, oh my gosh, like, why didn't I notice that? And I'm like, terrible. But, there are a lot of things during the disease that you don't really notice until it's really necessary, especially if you're balancing a lot of things. And just try to be easy on yourself.
And one of the things that I realized is um, the changes and the progression can be very subtle. And so it's kind of like when somebody in your household or yourself is losing weight, like you don't really notice it until you realize, like, wow, this shirt's way too big. And then you look in the mirror and you're like, yeah, I guess I have lost weight.
I love that analogy. That's so true. I never thought about it like that, but that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't notice that our hair is growing until you get to a few days before the hair appointment. You're like, dang, I think I got a hair appointment this week. So it's just, when you think about it that way, it was really easy to dismiss my mom's, not writing down the due date for this poor, real estate appraiser's film because, she was busy. The phone rang. She had to go to the bathroom, all of the above, just stuff happens. You don't think that somebody at 53 years old having memory issues. And it wasn't until it became chronic and worse that it was like, when she stopped recognizing her own handwriting, it was like, that's like a bat upside the head. And so, yeah, you feel badly, but it's like, it's really easy to dismiss. And, I don't know anybody that kind of immediately jumps to, oh my God, they must have Alzheimer's.
Right.
None of us wants to
Who
think
does
about that.
Yeah. There were 2 other things I did, if I may, wanted to mention about my book, because they were big, big learnings for me. And the first is palliative care and hospice care, because I always was under the impression that hospice care was, when you're days away from death. But for Alzheimer's, you can qualify earlier. And there are some hoops you have to jump through to get it kind of renewed. But hospice care is for the caregiver, it's for the patient, and they just have a lot of good information. And palliative care is before hospice care, and they don't, change your medications or anything. It may not be covered by your insurance, but I wish I had looked into that. Because when I did put my mom on hospice care, it was probably 3 or 4 days before she passed away. And I discovered that like half the floor was on hospice care. And like, I had no idea, and they were in the building. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is legal documentation, because if you're able to do it, it's so helpful and so important to try to get the appropriate legal documentation in place before your loved one loses that mental capacity. Because when you need it, it's going to be too late, because they won't have the requisite mental capacity to legally be able to enter into those agreements. And I interviewed several people and asked them, because a lot of people living with dementia, they don't want to sign those documents. They don't want to sign a power of attorney. they don't want to sign the healthcare documentation. So I did really make an effort to talk to other people about how did you convince your dad to sign that? Or let's think about what are some ideas, like what's a script, like what are some different approaches that maybe people could use to try to get those things in place. So I did just want to mention those two things.
Nope, that's super important. And the script for how to get them to agree to signing the documentation is definitely a great idea. My parents had a living trust, and so that took care of a lot of stuff. And my husband and I have one as well. And so you make all those decisions, and it actually was a relief when we did it. It's kind of like, oh, okay, that wasn't quite as bad as I expected it. The biggest question was, because we only have one child, was what would happen with our estate if she passed away first. Would we give it to her husband or, whatever, and the amazing amount of mental gymnastics one does when faced with that kind of, first off, I told the attorney that was a really rude question. That's not cool. I don't like that question. And then I was thinking about it, and, my son-in-law comes from a family that's very poor, and there's just a lot of dysfunction. And, you can mentally make up all these what ifs. And one day I was coming down the stairs and I thought, I'll be dead. I won't care. And so I told him, I'm like, if I have to come back and haunt you because you let your family do some stinky stuff with you on the money you get from us, that's going to happen. And that was the end of it. It's like, geez, I'm like doing all this mental gymnastics, what if, and it's like, I'll be dead. I won't care. If, he's an adult. If he lets them manipulate him out of an inheritance that, my daughter has an autoimmune disease. So it is possible she could go first. Not 100% likely because he is 5 years older. But it's like, I won't care. I'm not going to worry about it. I think just letting go of a lot of that, just, you really won't care. Just don't stress yourself out about stuff you have no control over.
Yeah. And don't get upset if you read these documents and they make no sense, because I think elder care law is complicated, and I'm a lawyer, but even some of my parents gave me a manila envelope, like in, 2009 or something, and said, here, we kind of had a discussion about, what would happen if they passed. And when I never opened the envelope. Why would I open the envelope? I don't know. But when I finally did open it, it was at a time when it was so emotionally charged. It was helpful to have somebody just, let me make sure I understand this, because some of the language is a bit archaic or medical, so don't feel bad if you don't understand that. And like you, I recently renewed all my documentation, and I felt terrible. You don't want to think about your mortality, So anyway, but it is important.
Well, my paternal grandmother lived to be 103.
Wow.
And since I inherited negative family genes from her side of the family, most specifically the fat gene, I've said, okay, well, I better not have inherited the bad brain gene from mom's side of the family, because that's going to be a reckoning when I go. So I'm just going to live to be 103 like her. And my mind will be fine. And so that means everybody's got to put up with me for another 46 years, 46 and a half. And it's just, we're all going to die. It's fine. Live the life as best you can. Do the best job you can. Be as happy as you can. And don't sweat the small stuff. Just boiled the whole episode down into one sentence.
That's great. Yeah.
It's not easy to do that, though. I'm a planner,
it's hard.
And I hate it when I make plans and, other people disrupt those plans, or, life disrupts those plans. It just makes me crazy. But I'm just trying to learn. The pandemic helped me learn that, it's okay. Just roll with it. I'm getting better at rolling with it. maybe by the time I'm 103, I'll be really zen. This has been fantastic. Let me show the book for the YouTube folks. There we go. So it's The Gap Between Loving and Supporting Somebody with Alzheimer's. It's definitely a book you're going to want to pick up because, like we said earlier, is memoir, but there's also really actionable tips, and you're going to need them. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope the book is a big success. Ugh, easy for me to say.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been so much fun. And it was great, talking to you and learning a little bit about your mom too.
Wow, thanks. You're one of my power listeners. You've gotten all the way to the end of this episode, and I greatly appreciate it. But I do have one last quick request. Could you go to Apple or Spotify podcast player and leave us a 5-star review? In your written review, you can ask a question or just simply state what you liked about this episode. Reviews are the best way to get new listeners, and the more new listeners, the more caregivers we can help. I greatly appreciate it. Now, here's what's coming up next Tuesday.
I wasn't aware this type of technology existed and could be used in this way. So none of this was available for him. But I've seen this happen in my client population. If all we get is mood regulation, like affect regulation, and the person is just calmer and easier to work with, again, I don't have any caregivers who say, I really wish he was aggressive and taking swings at us again. This whole calm, easy to work with thing, we don't like it. Like, no, people are like, oh, this is demonstrably better. My life got better because this person is more well-regulated, even if we haven't changed the course of their disease, which of course we want. But if all we get was affect regulation, and it makes everybody around them have a less stressful encounter, incredibly valuable.
Thanks for listening today, and we'll be back in your ears again next Tuesday. Please support our sponsors, for they help us bring this show to you for free.